Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz. And in today's Liz chat, this is a follow-up to my last two videos about basic boundaries and toxic behavior. So I had someone reach out and ask for tools. So I'm going to go over some of the things that we talked about in the last things that I talked about in the last two videos and give some tools around that. But first, I want to say that I do not have a traditional education. I very much have a non-traditional route in education, doing a 4-year program in healing arts, polarity therapy, energy work, belief systems, character structures, and childhood wounding. And everybody knows if you've been in and out of toxic behavior here and there throughout your life between books and videos and going to your therapist, you really do become an expert in the field if you've experienced yourself. So some of this is based on my own experience. First, I want to say, have compassion for yourself. If you found yourself in this type of environment, you're probably an empath, you focus on others, you ignore your needs and put others first, you're a caregiver, you've had early relationships that were toxic or had toxic behavior, possibly early boyfriends, parents, child of alcoholics. And these set up patterns from our youth that we then have to work through and heal today so we don't repeat those patterns in our relationships. So I want to say that any type of abuse is not okay. If you're getting physically harmed, please remove yourself from the situation and seek help. The most important thing is for you to be safe. I also want to say that it's a pattern of power and control, and it's not your fault. People in abusive relationships, it usually takes 7 times for them to leave before they successfully leave the relationship. I recommend books, educate yourself. I recommend seeing a therapist, getting help from them, getting help from your local Dove chapter, or go online and seek help. Some books I recommend are The Verbally Abusive Relationship and Controlling People by Patricia Evans. And she even states different tools and techniques at the end of the Verbally Abusive Relationship book that can help you. As children, we probably set up patterns of dealing with toxicity in our lives. So that gave us a high tolerance. So later in life, we're used to this behavior. So we kind of put up with it and deal with it because that was our normal when we were growing up. Think of it like if you had a father who worked all the time, had a couple jobs, he was never home. So if you then go and marry someone who is never at home and is always at work, that's your normal. So you don't even think about it. So that can be the same circumstance in a toxic relationship. If you had those situations in your youth and that's how you were raised, then those things can repeat themselves later in life. So really doing that healing work is important. And no, it's not your fault, but we do have to heal those patterns so we don't keep running into them later in life. So I also want to say that we all have the capacity for toxicity. If you're a tired mom and the baby's crying and there's a child throwing a tantrum, you might lose your patience. It's normal human behavior. The difference is knowing when you've done it, making the effort to repair, learning from your behavior and not doing it again. You actually know it was wrong and you want to change your behavior and not repeat, patterns from your childhood. It's toxic when the behavior is happening, the person thinks it's normal, and there's no change in their behavior. So they just keep repeating the pattern over and over again because they think that's normal behavior. I do also want to say that people can change. In my healing program, we call it, steps through awareness to healing. So realizing that you do something, and then the next step might be you realize that you're doing it, but you can't stop yourself from doing it. The next step would be you realize you're doing it, but you're making strides to shift it in the moment to not do what you did before. The next would be you could choose that behavior, but you don't choose it, and then not doing it. And someone who has grown up with toxicity and knows that from their youth and has modeled themselves after that and is then taking it out on their partners, employees, and stuff like that, that's their normal. So they need to heal that, and that they can heal that with a lot of work with the right person. So therapy would really come in handy. And remember, toxic, again, I want to say that toxic behavior is not okay. Anytime it's not your fault. And let's talk about boundaries, because really this work in dealing with toxic behavior is strong boundaries. And if we came from a childhood or past relationships where these boundaries were being crossed, and say we're the caregiver or we avoid difficult situations, then we're taking all of this toxicity on and not dealing with it. We're not having boundaries around it. We're not standing up for ourselves or having a voice or saying this or that's not okay, because we're just trying to avoid any difficult situations. So a teacher and mentor of mine uses the inner and outer circle technique, which I really love and have adopted for myself. And then I have a speaker that I've interviewed previous on Raise the Vibe with Liz and my Raise the Vibe local radio show that talks about an auditorium. And there are people in the front of your auditorium, the middle, and then out the door. So let's talk about the circle. So we have our inner circle and our outer circle. So those inner circle people are people that we can trust and treat us well. We keep those people around. And as people act out their toxic behavior or abuse us, they move outside the circle. So say, I'm going to give an example of work. So you're at work, you're with a manager. I know I mentioned this in the last one. So removing yourself from the situation or talking to the owner or something like that, possibly switching jobs, sitting down with the manager and outlining what's okay and what's not okay. If it's the owner of the restaurant, I know I worked at a restaurant in my youth where the owners and managers would just yell at you in front of everybody, and they were very toxic. And I could see, the ones that were kind of used to that behavior stuck around because the money was good, but those people who did not have possibly that behavior in their lives, they were able to move on and find a different position. So again, that goes back to what are we programmed to tolerate, from childhood, or those influential people in our lives. How did they treat us, and what are we programmed to put up with? What is our tolerance for toxicity? Family. So you can't avoid Thanksgiving or Christmas, possibly, or something like that. So what do we do in those situations? It might be if we need to call family members, if they're toxic, maybe keeping it short. If there's something that we need to talk about parents or siblings or what's going on in our own life, or they've called us, having the conversation go well. And as soon as it starts to turn, making up an excuse to get off the phone or cutting us short, or no, hey, I can talk to this person for 5 minutes, but after that, I'm done. When you're at a holiday and someone starts talking, maybe setting up a boundary, start small, change the subject, voice what's okay and what's not okay, or hey, let's not talk about this here, or can we talk about this another time, or redirecting the conversation, or saying excuse me and going to speak with someone else. And limiting time. You can always limit a time. Give yourself an excuse. If there's somebody you don't want to sit next to at the table, make sure they're sitting first before you sit down, or put a coat on the chair like somebody's sitting there. And then when they've sat down, remove the coat and somebody else can sit there. With your children, you may have to set boundaries. What's okay and what's not okay. As they get older, it can be a little bit more difficult. And sometimes it's hard to tolerate. You may find yourself, either putting them in timeout, putting yourself in timeout. You may find humor in the situation because it's so over the top, and having to excuse yourself from the situation. Later in life, you can speak to the children, have them take 10 minutes, tell them you'll be in to speak with them in 10 minutes about their behavior, and really setting clear boundaries on how you would like to be treated and how they'll be treated, in the future, by having mutual, respectful conversations with each other. With partners and spouses, really drawing the line and what is okay and what is not okay. So I'm going to go through some of the things I discussed in my last video, some behaviors, and kind of give some tools around what those are. So I talked about someone who is irritated or angry. Maybe they wake up irritated. Give them some space. If they come home from work irritated, give them some space. Remove yourself from the situation. If they follow you, ask for 5 minutes. Make a request. I need 10 minutes to relax. Hey, why don't you take 10 minutes and relax? When your children get home, have them take time to acclimate, before you go into your day, or asking them about their day or something like that, and removing yourself. In the verbally abusive relationship, she even said, as far as putting your hand up, no, this is not okay. You can't talk to me that way. And again, removing yourself, going into your room. If they follow you, ask for time. You could actually leave. Let's see. If you feel puzzled by your partner's responses because you can't get them to see your intentions, or the punishment doesn't fit the crime, you can say, I can see you're triggered right now. Can we stick a pin in this and come back to it? So stating your needs. And this is very important. So one of the first steps you can do with figuring out your boundaries is figuring out what your needs are, examining what you emotionally need, what is okay with you and what is not okay with you, and then starting to slowly set those boundaries. At first, since you've been far over here and not setting any boundaries at all, you may swing all the way over here with your boundaries and be super firm, but that is okay because it's a learning process. So it's, practicing, and then eventually you'll find balance and find a center in your boundaries where you can be clear and firm in setting your boundaries, and not letting people walk all over you or being too harsh in setting your boundaries. I do want to say that when you start setting your boundaries, people aren't going to be okay with it sometimes because they're not used to you having boundaries. So be prepared for people to kind of give some pushback or get other people involved possibly, or even leave. So be prepared for that when you start setting your boundaries, because they're not going to like it. Different situations, they're making you feel mostly wrong and they're right. Again, this is probably because they're triggered. They want something to go their way. So asking them for time. Can we stick a pin in it? Can we come back in 10 minutes? Can we make an appointment to discuss this tomorrow? I think this is a good time also to talk about vulnerability. So I do want to state that you can't be vulnerable with a person who has toxic behavior, because you'll know from your experience that you have told them personal things and they have used them against you. And even though they may say that they want you to be vulnerable and share yourself with them, you've gotten to the point where you actually can't. And sometimes it's not even safe, because those things will be brought up again. They will be used against you. in judgment, in shaming, in trying to make you feel like, their behavior is because of what you did X, Y, and Z, and that sort of thing. So if you're in a situation where that's happening, you can't be that vulnerable. You have to have that firm boundary. You can't give them any ammunition. And at this point, I do recommend therapy, although with therapy, that's also tricky because a toxic person can go into therapy with an agenda. So being aware of that. And if they're very charming and charismatic and very eloquent, they can try to sway the therapist, and they also play victim. So that can play a role in it too. So really finding a therapist who knows how to deal with toxic relationships is important. You just can't go to anybody. Make sure they have a background and a history in it. And when you first go to therapy, you may not have a voice or think about telling them what's going on or what you've been dealing with, but be brave, be courageous, share your story, maybe ask for a separate meeting. So, with the both of you, so you can both lay out your stories, and then the therapist will be able to better help you both. I want to say that if you are being harmed or abused, please remove yourself from the situation. Again, seek help. With the angry looks and glares, say you can't do that anymore. That's unacceptable behavior, and that's not okay. The controlling money. So this can be a difficult one, and could be a deal breaker. You may need therapeutic intervention. You may need support from an outside resource on this one. So get support. Blaming you for the abuse or denying that they're abusing you. So some people think that it's normal behavior, that the reason you argue is to hurt the other person. And it is not. So the reason for an argument is to resolve a situation. And when you have left an abusive situation and had the chance to have a healthy relationship, you will see that there's healthy communication going on, that there's give and take, that there's resolve instead of harm. So really, do no harm in a relationship is really how solving problems should go. It shouldn't resort to arguing or hurting the other person or putting down the other person or name calling or any of that. So just know that other types of relationships exist. It is possible for you to have a healthy relationship. They've exist. I've experienced them, and they're out there. So don't give up hope. Another one on my list that I talked about was following you, showing up uninvited. That is not okay. So as soon as this happens, if they show up at your work or they show up at your house or something like that, tell them that they can't do that. Ask them to leave. If you feel like you're being threatened, don't open the door. Seek help. Let's see. The next one, going through your things, your mail, your email, your phone. So this is usually an action from projection where they're doing these things, which makes them lose trust. So they're going to question you. And again, setting up boundaries. Hey, I'm not hiding anything. It's not okay for you to go through my phone. And this is not okay behavior. Please don't do this again. And if it continues, you might need to seek help. Destroying property, kicking doors, walls, furniture, throwing things, hitting things, all not okay. All behavior to show you what they could possibly do to you. It's not all right. You need to ask for change. If you don't get the change, seek help and see if they can help you. Force or insisted sex. So this is not okay. If someone is harassing you to have sex with them, it is not okay. You need to have a clear no. If you give in to sexual harassment because you don't want to deal with it, that is actually consensual rape. It is a pattern based on avoiding and not wanting to deal with their behavior. And it is not okay. So if you are doing this, you need to start setting boundaries and saying no, because you're not putting yourself first, and you need to put yourself first. What's going on has nothing to do about your needs and all about theirs. And in a healthy relationship, there is mutual affection and love. Now, if somebody requests sexual intimacy and you're not in the mood, but out of love, you gift them their pleasure, that's one thing. But if you're giving in just to avoid conflict, that is not okay. And again, that's consensual rape, and you need to change that pattern. Seek help, start putting firm boundaries up, start changing. They may not like it, tough. They'll either get used to it or they may leave. Again, seek help. And then threaten to harm you or a pet or intimidate you. Again, not okay. State clear boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay. Be firm, even if you just have to go, stop. This is not okay. I'm not dealing with this right now. We'll come back to this tomorrow. Let's make an appointment tomorrow. I'll come back 10 minutes after you've calmed down. If that doesn't work, seek help, therapy, and that sort of thing. Remember, they don't like change. Make sure you're alerting your therapist about what's been going on, because they could go in with an agenda. Most of the time, you cannot go to your in-laws or family members of your partner, because remember, they raised them. So it's their tribe. And where do you think they learn the behavior? So sometimes you can go to, family about this, and sometimes you can't. Most of the 9 times out of 10, you can't. And if you have in-laws that make it difficult for your relationship, you can't. So let's see. Back to boundaries. So making sure you communicate your boundaries, finding clarity. It might be difficult at first, but once you get used to it, it'll get easier. When you're used to avoiding conflict, it's going to be really tough to step into your voice. But as you practice and work on it, you're going to get stronger. Again, it might swing drastically. So you're way over here, not having any boundaries at all. You may swing way over here and be loud and boisterous and pushy about it. But eventually, with practice and courage and repetition, you will come into balance. So start small, build your confidence, be courageous to set your boundaries, and know what you want for yourself. Seek support if you're having difficulty setting boundaries. With people who have experienced this themselves, counselors, or the Dove Project or online resources. Learn about yourself, your emotions, what's okay with you, what's not okay with you, and give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to stand up for yourself. Give yourself permission to stumble and be human and not know at first, and just practice. Observe situations. How are situations making you feel, and what can you do about them? And then if you don't know, seek support. Again, always seek support. And again, be direct and name your limits. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Liz Chats on Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz, and I hope you enjoyed all this, and I hope it gives you some pointers to be able to handle your situation or learn from past situations that you've been in before. And again, if you are in a situation where you're being abused physically, please remove yourself and get somewhere safe. Anyway, best to everyone, and thank you for listening. Thank you, everyone. Bye.